Brian the Leafs guy here, wanting to go over a few different topics throughout this video, but just an update on the Leafs side of things. First of all, we're going to talk about Craig Berube being hired as their head coach. And then two, I wanted to go over the offseason needs from Toronto. I'm not going to get into specific players specifically, but I wanted to go over the different things that I personally see that the Leafs need to address over the course of this offseason and into next year to be a Stanley Cup contender. Because I personally did not believe they were a Stanley Cup contender going into the playoffs. I thought their teams were better constructed the past few years than they were this year, in some aspects at least. So let's go over it. So first things first, Craig Berube has been hired as the head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. I personally did not believe that Sheldon Keefe was the problem with this team. I know some people would disagree with that. I thought he was a great coach. I thought he did the best he could with what he was given. And I personally did not believe he was given a Stanley Cup contending team this year come playoff time. We really needed a big upgrade on defense, and he wasn't given that upgrade. You know, between the combination, I went through this in our video last week, between the combination of Lyubushkin, Benoit, and Edmondson, those are three guys on defense who I really like all three individually, but they're all complete offensive black holes. There's no offense that is being generated at all from our defense. And that has been something that we have had as an issue for a few years now, where we can't generate enough offense from our defense. And it turned out to happen again throughout the playoffs. We just could not score. And I believe the biggest reason why is Benoit, Lyubushkin, and Edmondson. Having three guys who are just a black hole of offense and on the defense is just a problem. But yeah, Craig Berube has been hired now. In saying that, so in terms of Sheldon Keefe, I still thought it was the right move, that it was time to give somebody else an opportunity to see if that could spark things. But I believe Sheldon Keefe will have a lot of success wherever he goes next. I believe he will get hired. There should be, I think, probably New Jersey is probably going to be the option. We'll see. Maybe even Pittsburgh. We'll see how that all plays out. But I wish him all the best moving forward. Craig Berube was the coach of the St. Louis Blues. He was just fired this year. A few years back when they won the Stanley Cup, he was hired mid-season that year and took them from last place to first place. And then they ended up, last place into winning the Stanley Cup. Clearly he has a cup pedigree. And they, obviously, St. Louis never won the cup again. But, you know, that team, that year, going into that year, I made the prediction that St. Louis was going to win the Stanley Cup. And by January, that prediction looked terrible because they were in last place in the league. They made that coaching change. They made a goalie change. And then all of a sudden, they made the playoffs. And then they ended up winning the cup. And it made me look like a genius. It's still my proudest moment, me calling that the St. Louis Blues were going to win the Stanley Cup. And they did. That team was just so good, was so stacked. So we'll see. It'll be good to get a new voice into the room and go from there. I'm excited to see how that plays out. But in terms of what I believe we need, I'm going to open up Cat Friendly here. So let me just switch to my scene here. Perfect. Cat Friendly. So the biggest things that I believe we need is on defense and in goaltending. But we will go over the forward group as well. So the biggest thing that we need is we first either need a starting goalie or a tandem goalie. So we'll start with goal. We have Joseph Woll, who I really like, and I believe all of us, at least most of us, really like him. At this point in time, it's uncertain about his injury status. He's constantly hurt, you know, like making crazy big saves, and then he hurts himself, and then and this has been happening too often. So I would not feel comfortable putting him as our starting goalie off the bat just because of that. He's a good enough goalie to be a starting goalie in the NHL, absolutely, but his health has not been where it needs to be to say, yeah, this is all yours, kid. So I believe we need a tandem goalie or starting goalie. There's a few free agent signings. Like in terms of free agents, we have Stollers, who's big. He's on Florida. He was kind of their backup goalie. He has had great numbers. He is my potential number one target from free agency. I think he would be a bit of a cheaper option. But in terms of trading potentials, there's UC Saros and Olmark, who I'm also interested in. I know there's Markstrom. I'm less interested in Markstrom just based on his age and the length of his contract. But we'll go into those in future videos. And then I re-signed, in this scenario, I re-signed Martin Jones for $1.1 million, which is the maximum allowed to be buried. At least it was this past year. I'm not too sure if that changes or not. And we just say, hey, Martin, we'll send you down to the minors. And then he plays in the minors, and I thought he was so good for the Leafs when we needed him. So as our third option, Martin Jones, I would love to bring back and just bury that contract in the minors. I'm sure Martin Jones would be perfectly fine with that too. So in terms of our defense, the biggest thing that we need, and I think this is the biggest thing our team needs just in general, is a top pair defensive right defenseman. So somebody to play beside Morgan Rielly. We haven't had a proper pairing with Morgan Rielly for a while now. Brody was that, but he's also a left shot, so I want a right shot. And Brody is also not physical. Brody was a very good defensive defenseman, and he was a really good partner for Morgan Rielly for a while. But I want somebody who's more physical and who can play who has a right shot beside Morgan Rielly. So that's what I'm really looking for there. And I believe in terms of free agency, Matt Roy from LA is probably our best bet. He's probably like a number 3 defenseman, but I'm okay with that. Somebody who's just steady, defensive, physical beside Morgan Rielly. Because in the playoffs, the past 3 years, we've put Lyubushkin, Schenn, Lyubushkin, which doesn't make sense. Like, Lyubushkin and Schenn are fine players, but they should be your number 6 or number 7 defenseman. They shouldn't be playing beside your best guy. They should be on the bottom pairs and not getting a ton of minutes, which they didn't. But we really need a stud right defenseman, and we haven't had a stud right shot right defenseman in forever, right? I personally really like Morgan Rielly. I like his contract. I think it's a perfect contract. When he signed the $7.5 million a year for 8 years, I was like, that's perfect. That's what we need. The next thing we need, I think we need another right shot defenseman who is a top 4 right defenseman, who's either a two-way right defenseman or offensive right defenseman. I understood the Klingberg signing because we haven't been generating enough offense from our defense for years now, and I believe that was a Sheldon Keefe signing because he was asking for more offense from his defense for a while. I personally didn't love the signing because I thought that money was better spent on either a two-way or a physical defender because we're still lacking in that area coming into this year, but they went with Klingberg. Didn't work out. He got injured. We got to bury that cap space, so it didn't really affect us in the long term. But either a two-way or an offensive right defenseman, Scott Walker, who's now playing in Colorado, who was in Philadelphia, I think would be a great option there. But there's a few other guys. There's a few really interesting right defenseman prospects, or not prospects, but pieces out there this year. There's Pesce from Colorado. There is DeMello from Winnipeg. There's Tanev, who's in Dallas at the moment. Those would all be interesting pieces. Not just to fill out our defense just in general. Not all of those guys are offensive in nature or two-way even. But there's a lot of different options for our defense. Also, it sounds like I've heard rumblings or rumors, I think a few of us have, about Hronik from Vancouver being potentially available. It doesn't make sense to me. I think Vancouver needs to extend him. They pay him the $7 million. But if he does become available, I would throw a first-round pick and Liljegren at him, and I think he would be an amazing option to provide some offense from our defense and just be a great defender. And the other addition that I want is an offensive left defenseman, bottom pair. So somebody like Gustafson from New York Rangers would be a perfect addition. He was on our team last year. I thought he was a great addition. I wanted them to extend him last year, but they didn't. I was willing to extend him for 2 years, $1.25 million. They didn't, and he ended up getting $850,000 with New York Rangers, and it's looking like a steal of a deal. I thought it was a great. I thought he was would have been a perfect either 7th or 6th defenseman for the Leafs, but they let him walk. So in this scenario, I created 8 defensemen. It's an 8-core D-man group. So Morgan Rielly with a defensive pair. Top pair defenseman, McCabe with a two-way or an offensive right D, the offensive left D, let's call him Gustafson beside Liljegren. I'm okay keeping Liljegren. I'm okay trading Liljegren. We'll see what plays out there. And then Benoit with Timmins, right? Like a defense guy with an offense guy. Benoit will make the roster pretty often, right? Like there's just 8 guys who can play, and just you have a lot of flexibility here. Timmins can also be down. Niemela can be that guy on defense as well. So that's what I would like our defense to look like, and I believe that we will have the cap space to do it as well. So we have the cap space to overhaul our goaltending and our defense, but that really depends on what we can do on forward. Obviously, we have the big 4. We have Nylander, Matthews, Tavares, and Marner. And people have always been saying, like, the problem with the Leafs is that they have 4 guys making $40 million. And I actually disagree with that statement. I believe that the problem was that they had 3 guys making $33 million. I didn't believe Nylander's contract at $7 million was an issue at all. It was the fact that they had Tavares, Matthews, and Marner all at $11 million or above was the issue. I've been saying for a few years that Mitch Marner should have been the guy that had been traded. I thought they should have traded him the past 2 off seasons, and I love Mitch Marner. I think he's brilliant, and that's not a slight on him. It was more just to create a better roster construction, because you can take his $11 million contract, get a $5 million forward and a $6 million defenseman, or a $7 million defenseman and a $4 million forward, and this roster looks a lot better. So in terms of the offseason, obviously all 4 of those guys have no movement clause, full no movement clauses. They don't need to be traded, or they can all say, no, we're staying, and there's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing that Toronto can do about it in those scenarios. I can see, so Austin Matthews, let's get that off the table. He's not going anywhere. Nylander just extended 8 years. I don't see him moving either. So it's Mitch Marner, John Tavares. I think we've all concluded that. I do see a scenario where John Tavares waves, and I do see a scenario where Mitch Marner waves. We will go over that in the future videos as to where I could see them waving to and what that could potentially look like. John Tavares, I could see Chicago making sense. But we will see. Like, that would be, I don't expect the Leafs to get anything in return. Maybe just a future considerations. If the Leafs trade Mitch Marner, the Leafs should get a nice package back. That would be a big piece. A Nashville package would be interesting if we got UC Saros back with a first-round pick or something like that, and then we get a bunch of cap space. We'll see how that plays out. Like I said, I'll get into that into future videos. But for the offense here, I brought back Domi and Bertuzzi on matching contracts, like $4.5 million a year for 5 years. I'd be really happy getting both of them. If we were to only get one, I would choose Domi just because he plays on center. But I really like what Bertuzzi brought to this team. I really like what Domi brought to this team. I really like that line. I really like that line between Matthews. So I hope they can bring them back. In this scenario, Max Domi gets a pay increase, but Bertuzzi gets a pay decrease from his last contract. We'll see how that plays out. Maybe Bertuzzi's not getting enough in this scenario that I wrote out, but we'll see. I put down Mitch Marner on long-term injury reserve here. I'm just assuming that he's going to be the guy that gets traded. Maybe him and Tavares get traded. We'll see how that plays out. But in this scenario, I kept him on long-term injury reserve. I'll make some teams in the future that we keep Mitch Marner and then we trade John Tavares. But yeah, so then obviously you have Matthews. You got Nylander, John Tavares, Nyes. I put Bobby McMahon and Robertson. Just got Robertson into a 2-year, $1.25 million a year contract. I put Fraser Minton and Easton Cowan on here, but we'll see what happens with Fraser Minton and Easton Cowan. There's 13 forwards here, so not all of them are going to be... Sorry, there's 14 forwards I put on this roster. So one of these guys is going to go down, or 2 of these guys. So either Cowan or Minton, they might both be starting in the minors. We'll see how that plays out. And this fourth line, I actually really like this fourth line of Dewar, Kampf, and Yarncroke. Yarncroke has some offensive ability. Dewar and Kampf are just both defensive-minded. Dewar put up some points as well. I just think that's a great fourth line. And I put Holmberg as one of our spares as well. So, for that third line center slot, so if you look at this team, I think the other hole that we have is a third line center. If we get Max Domi, if we get Bertuzzi, if we trade Marner, it's a third line center that we're missing. But we have Cowan, Holmberg, and Minton. I think Holmberg is a weak third line center. He should be our fifth line center or a fourth line center or a fourth line winger. I do like Holmberg, though, but as a third line, I think it's weak. But between Holmberg, Cowan, and Minton, one of those guys should be able to step up into being a serviceable third line center. And if, for some reason, we are still struggling and that's still a hole at the deadline, that's where you would make this work. So in this scenario, if we fix the goaltending, we got either a starting goalie or a tandem goalie. We got a top pair right defenseman and got a top 4 right defenseman as well, and a left shot defenseman. I'm okay keeping that 3C spot for Holmberg, Cowan, and Minton to battle it out, and they can figure out, we might have other guys. There could be, somebody else to play. And then at the deadline, that could be adjusted. But overall, that's what I really see we need to do. Goaltending, get a goalie, get 2 top pair right defensemen, 2 top 4 right defensemen, and a bottom pair lefty who's offensive in nature. And then trading either one or both of Tavares and Marner. I love Tavares. I love Marner. I think they've done great. Obviously, there's been some struggles in the postseason. We are all aware of that, but I'm not hating on these guys at all. And me suggesting that Mitch Marner is our best option to trade isn't me flaming or hating on Mitch Marner at all. If we keep him, I'm actually be very happy. But if we trade him, I will understand that as well. But one of those 2 guys needs to be moved on. If we're able to, if they do decide to waive, to really help create a better, well-rounded roster. So those are my thoughts. That's what I'm seeing. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Of course, over the next few weeks, I'll make a team that has just John Tavares. I'll fill in actual names of players here. I just kept it very brief here. And same thing with Mitch Marner. So I'll do it as if we traded Mitch Marner. I'll do a scenario as if we traded John Tavares. Maybe I do a scenario as if we traded both of them. Because in this scenario, we still have a $13 million player and 2 $11 million players. I still think that's a problem. The good thing about this is John Tavares, I would be okay extending him, keeping him and extending him at like $6 million a year. So then we have 1 year where we have an issue, and then all of a sudden it no longer becomes an issue. And then he could be a top 9 forward just in general, whether it's a wing or a center. Anyways, love to hear your thoughts. I've been just rambling a little bit, but I so appreciate you guys tuning in. Until next time, Brian the Leafs guy, out of here.